Hey, I'm Bob at ILikeToMakeStuff. Today I'm going to show you how to make a longboard. I started out with some scraps of hardwood that I had and ran them over the joiner. Cut them down into some different sized strips and then chopped off the ends to make sure that I had a couple of square ends to line up. I wanted a stripe of dark wood down the middle of the board, so I laid them out in the way, and once I got them in a place that I wanted them, I went back and made some marks to add biscuits. I had to cut a whole bunch of biscuits, but since I was going to be joining these up to a panel, the biscuits were kind of a good idea to help with strength. Now normally skateboards are made with plywood, but I decided to use a hardwood instead, and this stuff was about an inch thick. The lighter wood is oak, and the darker wood I believe is walnut, but honestly I'm not really sure. I got a bunch of scraps of hardwood from an old woodworker, and so I'm not really sure what types of wood they are, but I really love the look of this wood. If anybody knows what it is by looking at it, please let me know in the comments. So I joined all this stuff up with the biscuits, and once I got it all glued up and in place and everything, I used my clamps to clamp it down. Now, like I've said before, if you don't have clamps, buy clamps. And if you have clamps, buy more clamps. You can always use more, and I could continually add clamps to this just to get it tighter and tighter. And once you get something like this all clamped up, it's a really good idea to take a wet cloth and wipe off as much of the glue as you can. It's just less cleanup to do later. It's easier to clean up wet glue than it is dry glue. I wanted to make a template for the board so that it would be symmetrical on both sides, and I really didn't have any idea how to do this. I just kind of started drawing. I knew that I wanted it to be a little bit under 10 inches at the widest point, and I'd found a couple of designs that I liked, so I kind of mimicked the overall shape. I drew freehand the design on one side and then flipped the paper over. I could see it through the other piece of paper, so I just traced it. Now once all the glue had dried, I took the clamps off. The two boards that I started with both had a little bit of bow to them, and even though the thickness was close, it wasn't quite the same between the two boards. I took a plane and knocked down some of the rough edges to try to get them as smooth as I could. I don't have a planer, that would have been a much easier way to do it. I took some spray adhesive and lightly covered the surface and laid down my template, and yes, I laid it down at an angle on purpose. Finally got to use my new bandsaw, and man, it was awesome. The template made it really easy to follow the line that I wanted, and I really enjoyed using the bandsaw. I hope to use it a whole lot in some future projects. I just cut out the general shape of the board and then went back and kind of did details. And I'm just getting used to it, so I think over time I'll get better at following the line and actually getting the details out of it that I want. But overall, I thought it turned out pretty well for a first use. And of course, some of my cuts weren't perfectly straight, so the sander helped kind of knock down and even out some of those different little ridges that were created by the bandsaw and me not really knowing what I'm doing. I used a router to kind of run over the edges just to smooth it out, and then spent quite a bit of time sanding. Now I knew ahead of time that this board was not going to be like something that was going to be perfectly smooth, because as soon as you take it out on the street, it's going to get dinged on the concrete, and it's just not going to stay like a finished piece of furniture. So I wasn't too worried about the full finished product, but I wanted to spend a little time just to sand it down, just to make it look nice. I just wanted to bring out the natural color of the wood, so I used a natural stain and just kind of did one layer of it, and man, it made that dark stripe pop. I really love the way that turned out. Kind of in the moment, I decided to screen print my logo, and I probably should have thought ahead a little bit more about the placement, but it's fine. Now, I don't expect this thing to stay pretty for very long once it's on the road, like I said before, so I really only did one coat of poly. These trucks and wheels were from Amazon, and the whole set was like 40 bucks. And I know someone who is a skateboarder or longboarder, they would look at this and probably think the hardware is junk, the wheels are junk. But it works great. I mean, they work fine, and they were super cheap. It's really easy to put together. It's just a washer, the wheel, a washer, and a nut. And you just repeat that process for every wheel. It was really easy. As far as placement of trucks, I don't know if there's really a perfect way to do this. I just drew a center line so that the trucks would be in line with each other, and then pushed them as far forward and as far back as I could. Just tried to make sure that they were centered on that line that I drew. Now you can see here why I picked a bad spot for my logo. I didn't really think about the fact that the trucks were going to go there, and it gets kind of covered up, but it worked out fine. Next I had to add the grip tape, and that stuff is super sticky if you've never used it, so take your time and just be ready for it. Now there's videos online that explain how to do this well, and probably better than I can, but basically you lay it down to get rid of the air bubbles, you score around the edges, and then you run a knife along the edge of the board at an angle. I had to do a little bit of trimming, but it came out pretty well for the first time. I poked holes through the grip tape in the holes that I drilled before, and then used a countersink to make sure that the bolt heads could drop all the way down into the board. My board is a little bit thicker than a plywood board would normally be, and so I had to make sure that the bolts were long enough to stick through the board, up through this riser, and then through the truck. And actually they were just barely long enough. So if you do this, you might want to countersink them a little bit more than I did. You just add nuts to all these bolts and get them pretty good and tight, and then you're done. For somebody with more experience longboarding, this may not be a good board, but it works great for me. Thanks for watching. Be sure to share and like the video. For more content, go to ILikeToMakeStuff.com. If you want to support my projects, go to my Patreon page. There's a link there that explains what it is, how it helps me, and even a little bit of support from you makes a big difference for me. I'm out of breath. See you guys next time.